If you love fantasy with a twist, of course, some of those Discworld antics, or a story that feels like, Shakespeare maybe took a detour into the magical unknown, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I will be reviewing Lords and Ladies by Terry Pratchett. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at the 14th book in the Discworld series. I'm really making some real headway here as I try to cover my previously read books. I still have a fair amount to catch up, but as you can see, there's plenty to be discussed. Let's take a look at Lords and Ladies. It was originally published in 1992. We're still far from the present, and I think there's a lot that can be said about that when it comes to the types of things that Terry Pratchett is choosing to comment on, and of course a lot of his references tend to reflect the 80s and the 90s in my opinion, but anyway. This is the fourth book in the Witches subseries, where of course we're going to follow our three main protagonists, Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Ogg, and Magrat Garlick. And those are the three that we're following, and we're going to see some things that are really starting to shape up for them, particularly for Magrat. And we will see that this tends to blend, all the fun humor and all the references that you can expect from Terry Pratchett. And it's specifically going to have a strong influence from Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. So here's my quick synopsis. As I've told you before, when I'm doing these reviews, and since there's so many books in this series, I think it's pretty important that one of the big things I do is give a synopsis. And that being said, there is of course spoilers. I feel it hard to really talk much about these if I am not willing to tell some of the spoilers. So let's start this off with, of course, Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Ogg, and Magrat as they return from Lancra after their adventures in Genoa. As you may recall from the previous book that had the witches, Magrat gets a bit of a shock when King Verence has already arranged their wedding, seemingly without her input. And just as Magrat is adapting to courtly life, strange crop circles start appearing, which is a sign to Nanny and Granny that something big is about to happen. These circles are an omen of circle time, when the worlds align, allowing creatures from a parasitic elven universe to cross into the Discworld. Unlike the usual charming fantasy elves, these ones are downright terrifying. They in particular are known for their efforts to manipulate minds, and they use glamour in order to bend people's perceptions of what's going on and to get their way. So the story is going to build as our witches discover a new rebellious coven that has been formed by local girls, and so Granny engages in a face-off with Diamanda, the leader. But when Diamanda crosses into the elves' realm, Granny is forced to bring her back, and this incursion gives the elves the foothold they need to infiltrate Lancra. Meanwhile, Magrat finds herself in a bit of an identity crisis, as she has been sidelined from the coven and frustrated with her role as a queen-to-be when she discovers a letter Granny wrote to Verence. She's very hurt, but she does ultimately find strength in the legend of Queen Yinsi donning armor to confront the elves herself. And then here's the big spoiler. The climactic scene at the dancers sees Magrat challenging the Elf Queen, breaking free from the Elf Queen's glamour. Thanks to Granny's inner struggle and bravery, with Magrat's courage, the townsfolk rally, and the Elf Queen is ultimately subdued. Granny, thought to be dead, reawakens, having temporarily inhabited the minds of her bees, which is quite the accomplishment. With peace restored, Magrat and Verence marry, and Granny finds peace with her past. Something that's always kind of going on with Granny. That's the main storyline. Let me give you some of my favorite quotes from this. Like I said, I find Terry Pratchett to be very funny, and of course I think he has some great quotes. So let's just take a look at a couple of them. Personal's not the same as important. People just think it is. That is, of course, I think a great insight into how we manage to really internalize things that we probably shouldn't, because it's, not actually all that important. The shortest unit of time in the multiverse is the New York second, defined as the period of time between the traffic lights turning green and the cab behind you honking. I love this quote, one, because it's funny, but also because it is very representative of the way Terry Pratchett is writing. We're in a Discworld, we're in a totally fabricated world, but that does not stop him from also making references to the real world. And that's one of the things that is a big part of the humor. And it's one of the things that really kind of mixes what exactly is defining the Discworld and his approach to telling us about it. And I think this is a great example of that. Even the blind and meek and voiceless have gods. This line is, of course, in reference to just how many gods there are in the Discworld and how religion is one of the things that Terry Pratchett is certainly commenting on throughout the whole series, even if it's not necessarily the main topic of that. But if you would like to know more about that, certainly go back to one of my previous reviews, Small Gods. Don't try the paranormal until you know what's normal. I love that quote. I think that that encapsulates just the oddity of basically everyone involved. And of course, trying to figure out exactly what is normal is its own feat in many respects. And I think Discworld takes that to the extreme. This quote really stood out to me just because I think that the Unseen University, the wizards there, they just do such a great job of representing academia and the self-absorption and the ability to just space out. And that would be when the bursar says, "This is a lovely party. I wish I was here." So those are just some of my favorite quotes from this book, but it is Terry Pratchett, it is Discworld. You can find so many more. These are just the ones that stuck out to me as I was preparing this video. Who is this book for? Well, if you're a fan of fantasy and satire, as I've always said, or you just really enjoy specifically the clever commentary on Shakespearean themes, then Lords and Ladies will be right up your alley. And I would recommend it for anyone that applies to. If you're a follower of The Witch's Adventures in Discworld, then you will probably enjoy this book as well. Although I will say this is not one of their standout books. I don't think it's their strongest. When I think of the witches and the books that they're known for, this isn't, it doesn't rank particularly high, but it is still good. You still have the same characters. Their lines are still very funny and witty. I just think there's a few elements that just make it a little harder to be quite as standout as some of the other books with the witches. So who is this not for? Well, like I've said with all of them, it's a Discworld book. It's not any different in that respect. So again, you gotta like fantasy, you gotta like satire if you don't like those. If you think that this is sacrosanct in any way to be commenting on or have any reference to Shakespeare that is not just absolutely laudatory, then maybe you won't really care for it. Regardless, I would certainly say that it's still an entertaining book and you are more than welcome to give it a try, even if you haven't read any other Discworld books, but it would not be my first one. It wouldn't even be my first one to recommend in the Witches subseries, but it's Terry Pratchett. And if you are into this thing, then you are into this thing and you will enjoy it. Of course, if you have any other thoughts or things that you want to say about this book, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.